So in this video, I'm going to be talking about a case study, a company that has $500 billion in assets under management. And this company was started with $120,000. And today it has assets worth $500 billion. How do you take something from $120,000 and take it to 500 billion? This kind of growth almost seems impossible, and yet it has happened. It's a reality today. It's not a concept. It's not something that happened on Pluto. It happened on this planet, and it would be extremely valuable for us to analyze what they did and how they did it, and gain insights and lessons from it. So this company that I'm talking about is called KKR. Okay, it's a big name in private equity space. Most people don't know about them because they don't come out in the front promoting themselves too much with the general public, but especially in the finance investment world, this company is considered like godlike. Okay, so I was pretty interested in their story because first, when I went to the castle and I met Dan Pena, they showed this movie called Barbarians at the Gate, which was a deal that KKR did. This was a $30 billion acquisition that they did of this company called RJR Nabisco, which is the company that makes Oreo biscuits and Camel. At that time, this was the company that they had acquired. It was a major conglomerate. So how is it that this firm grew so much? Let's look into it. The company started with these employees. They were working in Bear Stearns. It's an advisory firm which helps other companies raise capital, and out of that capital they get some commission. And they also were facilitating leverage buyouts. Leverage buyout is basically when you leverage the company that you're buying with the bank to acquire the company itself. For example, like a real estate mortgage, right? The real estate that you want to buy itself goes as the collateral to finance the deal of buying that real estate, right? So the thing that you're buying itself, gets with the bank as the collateral, is kept with the bank as the collateral. Okay, so this is known as a leverage buyout if it's done for a company. Okay, the loan is secured with the assets of the company you are acquiring. All right, so they started the leverage buyout movement in 1970s, and it was a company that was started by ex-employees of Bear Stearns, and they had some money saved up from their deals, and three people got together and said, hey, listen, we tried a little bit of the buyout business. Why don't we start our own company? You put in $20,000, I put in $40,000, and we pool our resources and we start. And it's funny that they have now $500 billion in assets, and we'll get to how they exactly did it. I can break it down for you exactly how they did it. It's something that's very public now, okay? And I've been through their case study. So it's funny how a company is worth now 500 billion, but there was one time where I think Henry Kravis said when they ran out half of that money of $120,000, and he asks his partner, hey man, do you think we made a mistake moving into our own business? Maybe it would have been better to kind of stay in Bear Stearns, under the umbrella of Bear Stearns. We had more credibility when we were working for a company, and now people are not really responding to us when we are, walking into and knocking these doors to buy their companies. And they went from that to being people who were the most feared in the buyout game, because they would just, gobble up companies very fast. So here is their strategy. They grew primarily through acquisitions. Point number one, they grew primarily through acquisitions. They knew so that's number one. Second, they knew very little about running these companies. This might be shocking to you, but these guys are financial professionals. They know how to raise money based on the company that they find and attract capital from banks and investors. But they had no idea how to run these companies. Imagine doing a $31 billion acquisition and you don't know how to run the company. But that's not a problem, because when you are acquiring a $31 billion company, you have several million dollars to hire people who know how to run the company. It's kind of like fixing a bulb. You don't necessarily need to know how to fix a bulb if you have the money to have someone fix the bulb. It's the same logic. But how I thought is that you got to know everything. You got to know everything before getting into something. You got to know everything. But that's not the case. That's not how they did it. They had no idea, and it's from their interviews, the founder is saying we had no idea how to run these companies. So we would just acquire them and put the management team in place, and we would just set the targets, and it's all up and running. So they did one of the largest acquisitions at that time that were ever done. A $31 billion deal, a $40 billion deal. I mean, in 1980s, 1990s, that's a big deal. Right now you have tech companies acquiring, that's one thing, but doing that at that time was just absolutely wild. Okay, so they grew with acquisitions, they didn't know anything about operations. The third thing is that they put very little money of their own in deals. Imagine acquiring a company with not your money. You didn't put equity, you didn't put debt. Equity is capital that you raise from an investor. You didn't put your own savings, nothing. It's not your money, but you have the ownership of the company. Imagine acquiring a company and no money out of your pocket. So this is what they used to do. They would go raise money from banks and governments and several financial institutions and acquire these companies and take ownership stakes in the company. And they said in one of the interviews, Henry Kravis said that we used to access these capital sources which had covenant light loans. Covenant light loans basically means that they're going to give you a loan and they're not going to ask you for any personal guarantee, and all the risk is with the banks basically, and you don't have any personal liability in the loan. So you get to borrow the money and acquire the company without being on the hook for it. Just think about how much money would you raise if you can do that legally, ethically, being completely transparent with the bank about all the aspects of the deal, but attracting that capital, putting the deal together, having major control of these giant companies and not put in a single dime. How does a company go from $120,000 to doing $30 billion acquisitions, $40 billion acquisitions with not their own money and have no idea about operations? They were in a financial consulting, financial advisory firm. How can they know about biscuits and cigarettes and all of these companies that they were acquiring? And they were acquiring all kinds of companies. I mean, in so many sectors and industries. If they had the mindset block, I need to be qualified, I need to be a doctor to get into healthcare, I need to be a construction worker to get into construction business. I mean, if they thought like that, they would have never acquired those companies, but they did. And they protected themselves from financial risk too. So they attracted a lot of capital and they used debt. Majority of their deals were structured with debt. Why? Because with debt you get to keep the control. We have been through this in other of my videos. So they used debt, they acquired companies, they didn't understand operations, and they used debt. The fourth thing that they did was they did multiple IPOs. Multiple. So how can you do multiple IPOs? Well, you have the holding company and you have several companies under it. You can take each and these companies are also holding companies and they own other companies. So you can take each of these companies public, and all the capital that comes from the profits that happen when the IPO takes place can be flowed at the top here. And you can use this capital to acquire more and more companies. And as you acquire more and more companies, you form another company below this, and from this company, you move this capital down here and you start acquiring more and more companies, and you take this one also public. So the fourth thing that they did was they took several companies public, multiple IPOs. What happens is when you take a company public, instead of one buyer buying the company, you have thousands and thousands of people buying a piece of that company. The end result is obviously you get a lot of capital. So first, they attracted capital from the banks. They identified the biggest deals. They bought those companies. They took them public, which means more capital inside. And it's just like capital on top of capital on top of capital on top of capital, and this overwhelmingly crazy amounts of capital and crazy amounts of control and access. There was a story in one of the books, what's that? Merchants of Debt. That's what they were called, Merchants of Debt. So there is this book written called Merchants of Debt, where there is a incident in their life where Henry Kravis he bought a painting. He wanted to be an artist, by the way. He didn't want to be a financial professional. He really wanted to be an artist. So he had this regret that I couldn't be an artist. So what he used to do was he would order these crazy, $50 million, $100 million paintings from Rome, from Italy, and he would put them in his house. And these paintings sometimes were massive. So one time in his New York penthouse, the painting wasn't getting in. So he stopped the whole fucking traffic in New York. They opened up the building, they made a big hole, and from the fucking crane, they were putting his painting inside his house. I mean, that's the type of guys these are. Absolutely fucking rock stars, all right? Amazing, amazing guys. Hats off to them, right? $120, from $120 to now $500 billion. But look at the strategy. Acquisitions, without knowing operations, using debt. I mean, obviously leveraging other people's expertise while in the operations. You need expertise, it doesn't have to be yours, okay? Leveraging debt, other people's capital, which does not have your personal risk. And I can get into that. There are ways of structuring a loan where you are not personally liable. The company is borrowing the money, not you personally, all right? So they leveraged capital and they did multiple IPOs. And they brought a lot of money, and they kept doing this and kept growing this machine until now it's become $500 billion. They have $500 billion in assets. All right. So this is what's possible when you do acquisitions and when you do multiple exits. And the other thing they do, apart from the IPO, is they bought the company, they turned it around, and then they sold it to private equity firms. What happens when you sell it to a private equity firm? Private equity firm is basically a firm which a lot of people have invested in, and they've kept their capital there to be allocated and invested and multiplied. So it's a pool of capital. So when you sell it to a private equity firm, again, you bring in a lot of capital. So banks, capital in, and control of the company. Get it? Take these companies public or sell them with private equity firms. Once again, capital in. So if you look at it in very simple terms, all they did was identify where the big pools of capital are and in the world, and find a way to tie them all together with various structures, with their company right in the middle of all the action, and dealing with big money, institutional capital. Government has funds, right? Banks have big, gigantic pools of capital. Big companies like which have like billions and billions of dollars, making billions of dollars every year, have big chunks of capital. Like so banks, governments, billion-dollar companies, banks have a lot of capital. Stock exchange markets have a lot of capital flowing there, and they position their company right in the middle of all of this and found a way to tie all of this together. And that was their strategy, and the company is now worth has assets under management worth $500 billion. So I leave you with that. And if you want to learn this game, it's something that I got exposed to. I'm at the beginning of the stages where I am beginning to execute on this. I have got the information, I got it, and I have seen a glimpse of what's possible. Okay, and if you're someone who wants to execute, if you're someone who wants to be mentored by me, you can check out other videos of mine as well. You will have a much better clarity. If you are someone who wants to do something like this game is called mergers and acquisitions. All right, if you want to play this game, if you want to have a career in this niche, message me and we'll see what can be worked out. It's not for everybody. I don't work with everybody. I like working one-on-one, and when I'm working one-on-one while building my company, which is involved in these activities, I cannot be working with a lot of people. So I have very selected spots that I can offer, and I can only do this for a few people. So if you are interested, reach out to me, write me an email, and we will see what can be worked out. I'll talk to you soon.